Hey, out there in comic book land, it's a new year. Time for a new episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, episode 91. Happy 2022 to all of you. I hope it's better than last year and the year before. Please, dear God, have mercy on us. Okay. Ablo Show. I love this question, Ablo. Hope this finds you well. This might be a dumb question. It's not. But have you ever thought about doing a fantasy type character like a Conan or an Elric type character in a pre-colonial Africa type setting? I'm from South Africa, and so I may be a little biased, but I feel pre-colonial Africa is underused as a fantasy setting. Fantasy, swords and sorcery, deviltry, and stuff like that of Robert E. Howard always intrigued me, and I always felt sword and sorcery went great with the more Slav hero. Thanks for the new phrase, by the way. Gritty, pulpy, revenge-like tales. The type of stuff I always thought you did great. Your take on Frank is always fun. This is such an awesome question, and it's one I've asked myself over and over and over again. We're seeing now, and it's all due to this sort of woke period in entertainment, seeing a lot of gender and race swapping of characters, and generally here in the United States, when they race swap a character, they replace a white character with a African American. If you notice, they never replace an Asian or or Native American character than African American. It's always a white character, and I don't know what the point of that is. In some cases, it's okay. You know, The Equalizer with Denzel Washington, I thought was great. Hey, it's Denzel. I mean, Denzel's going to play Macbeth. That's fine with me, because Shakespeare is malleable that way. So I don't care. It's, you know, Shakespeare's plays aren't historical dramas. They're not historical recreations. So I feel it's okay to play with them. But the thing that bothers me about it is that replacing a white character with an African American character, I don't care about cultural appropriation. That's nonsense. What does concern me is, aren't there any interesting African American characters on their own? Aren't there any characters who build upon that heritage, that build upon that history? In a positive way. I mean, we see a lot of negative stories. If they do a historical story from an African American perspective, it always has to be, it always has to deal with racism in some way, as if that's the only thing that matters in African American history. And it's not. It's not, because African Americans are part of the American story, and they shouldn't be represented simply as, you know, a platform for discussing racial disparity or the history of racism in America, as if America were unique. The existence of racism only occurred here. And I think it demeans that heritage. The same for Africa, pre-colonial Africa. Talk about a rich tapestry. Talk about true diversity. You've got a continent. You know, it's a pretty big place, and many of its peoples were separated by either war or terrain or geographical distance. In Central Africa, you have tribes that rose up with entirely different cultures than the tribe 20 miles down the river. Different language, different gods, different cultures. So you've got this quilt of mythology and history and heroes and villains to draw from. And my only question is, why don't they do it? I mean, even Lion King is Hamlet rewritten. You mean there's not an African story? I can't believe that. Would I ever do this? No, I wouldn't. Have an interest. I mean, I think anybody should be able to write anything, but if someone was going to write an African version of Conan, I would prefer it was an African, personally, because I would want their perspective on this. You know, similarly, you know, if you were to write an epic story of the Monkey King, you would want a Chinese person to write it. I wouldn't want to see a movie of Musashi Miyamoto, you know, written by a white guy. You know, some of these things are so bound to culture. I prefer to see what a person of that culture thinks of it. Personally, Sergio Cariello and I have talked for years about a Conan-type character set in pre-colonial America. I mean, like, you know, 40,000 years ago, with Native American characters in a Neolithic setting, nomadic Neolithic setting, with woolly mammoths and dire wolves and giant beavers and all the rest. But if you understand what I'm saying is, by casting black African American, recasting white characters as black or African American is demeaning, because it implies that they don't have a culture of their own. And it's just so wrong. It's just so wrong. But I see this all over the place. I mean, we see the same historical events told over and over and over again in movies, as if no other historical event existed. As if they're, you know, they don't mine history for all of the interesting things they can do. They're constantly revisiting, you know, the Trojan War. You know, they're constantly revisiting King Arthur, which didn't even exist. You know, as much as I like Vikings, they're constantly making things about Vikings. You know, there's other eras to talk about. I was so pleased when Netflix did a really good series about the Romans in ancient Germany, in the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. At least it was something we hadn't seen before. So you know, like I said, you know, Africa has a rich heritage. It also has an enormous population of possible entertainment consumers. And you can say, oh, well, Black Panther. But Black Panther was all made up. It was all made up by two white guys. And you know, Wakanda doesn't exist. It's a sort of a pastiche of African culture. It's not real. It's a lot of stereotypes and cliches thrown together. You know, powerfully and successfully. But that's just the thing, isn't it? Black Panther was so enormously successful across a wide audience. I mean, the movie made a lot of money. And so it's obvious that the public would be accepting of a pre-colonial African Conan type story. I certainly think so. I certainly would watch it. I mean, just the vistas alone. I mean, you live in South Africa, you know, you've got some amazing landscapes there. Just absolutely spectacular stuff to set historical fantasy against. So yeah, why not? But you know, it just really annoys me when they feel this need, I guess, virtue signaling or whatever, you know, to misrepresent history in this way. And again, it's sort of a hollowing out or ignoring or neglecting the fact that Africans and African Americans had this incredible history, you know, that, I don't know. Yeah, but I would love to see a black Conan. I don't want to see a white Shaka Zulu, though. Okay. That was a great question. I love that question. I like this question, too. Dwayne Thomas, do you think you would have enjoyed the classic Silver Age DC approach of having an artist do the cover first and then handing that to the writer and saying, do a story to match this cover? Given your love of being told, here's what I want you to write a story about, and then being set loose to do that, I think you would have prospered under that system. I like to think that I would done okay back then. And I don't like being told what to do, but I do like being offered a challenge. And I think the king in this period of the crazy cover and the writers have to come up with stuff is Superman. And this literally is the way they worked. I mean, Mort Weisinger or Julia Schwartz or whoever at DC would just come up with this nutso cover idea and then not challenge the writers, order the writers, you know, write a story to go along with this. And it might, you know, to be fair, the cover may not have been completed. It's simply an idea they would throw out. And they would just come up with these, you know, nutty ideas to get you to pick the book up. and hopefully buy it. And I remember I met E. Nelson Bridwell, who was a Silver Age writer at DC, and he talked about this. I asked him about this, and he talked about it. And he said that, the most recent example was, and this was the early 70s when I talked to him, he said that Julius Schwartz was editing the Shazam comic book. And he said to E. Nelson and whoever else was in the room, what if everyone was afraid to say Captain Marvel's name? And Mr. Bridwell said, well, why would they be afraid to say Captain Marvel's name? And Schwartz responded, well, they don't pay me to think of that stuff. That's what we pay you to do. Write me a story where everybody's afraid to say Captain Marvel's name. So that's how those things began. And then we would immediately assign the cover, so the cover was done well ahead of time. and off to the races we go. I've had to do this myself. I mean, I wrote an issue of Twilight Zone for Now because Tony Caputo had bought a painting of a guy on a motorcycle. I don't know why. I don't know what that had to do with Twilight Zone, but he had bought the painting and he wanted a story to go with it, so I had to write a Twilight Zone story that involved a motorcycle. And when I took over Batman and the Outsiders, there had been another writer on that, and they scrapped his first 3 scripts. But I was, given the 3 covers. 3 covers had been done, and I had to, adjust my story to that cover. Even naming a character who appeared on the cover didn't have a name. So I've done that in the past, and these things happen. I remember speaking to Walter Gibson, the creator of The Shadow, wrote the Shadow pulps, and he said the very first issue of The Shadow had a Chinese guy swinging a hatchet. Shadow wasn't even on the cover. This Chinese guy in the stereotypical Mandarin outfit, and he's holding an axe up like he's going to chop somebody who's off scene. And they said, this is the cover, and he'd already written the first script, and they said, well, nothing like that is in my story. And they said, well, that's why you have to take the story back and add this guy in. So he had to rewrite the very first Shadow story to include this character that they had put on the cover. And it was probably a cover from a magazine that had been canceled or whatever, but hey, those pulp guys, they didn't waste a dime. They were going to get use out of that cover no matter what. So yeah, I think I could have done okay. I like to think that I could have made it back in those offices, back when you had to show up at DC wearing a tie. I could have done that. Ashley, Kronk 73. I started collecting comics around the time that the Batman Cataclysm crossover was being published. It seemed to me that all 3 of the main Bat books were the height of their creative powers at this time. Mensch and Kelly and Grant and Taylor, I don't know who Taylor is, were magnificent. But the art of Mr. Nolan seemed at its best, to me at least, when presented with the inks of Scott Hanna. May I ask what it was like to work with Graham Nolan and Scott Hanna? Well, they were just super pros. I mean, I've been friends with Graham for 35 years now. And he's one of my most frequent collaborators, and we still work on stuff together even now. And I'm doing something for his Compass Comics, a 10-page story that Graham graciously hired me to do. Now I'm working for him. But I agree, Scott Hanna is as close to Graham inking himself as you're going to get. Scott was always very true to what Graham laid down. I know Graham enjoyed Scott's inks, and they were very faithful to what Graham was doing. He understood Graham's energy, his use of blacks, things like that, to the point where on a couple of issues of Detective, Graham drew layouts. Now, if you've ever seen a Graham layout, and if you go to Graham's YouTube channel, ask him this. Ask him to show you some of his layouts. They're basically contour drawings. I mean, think of this drawing of Batman without any of the shading or feathering, just the contours. And that's a Graham layout. And to me, it's not a layout. It's a completed drawing. But sometimes he would do that. And Scott was able to go in and do what Graham would have done, placing the blacks, the feathering, the rest of it. And, you could not tell the difference between a Graham layout job and a Graham full pencil job, because Scott had an understanding of Graham's work, which is, I often say this, the collaboration between a pencil and inker is very much like a marriage. It either works or it doesn't. That they have an understanding of what each other can do, or they don't. And so it's, this was a good marriage. As far as working with Scott, Scott's just a terrific guy. He's one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. Super fast, very, very fast inker. To me, inkers are like the Jedi Masters. I don't quite understand what it is they do. I could never do what they do, and I appreciate what they do. And he did some killer stuff. And back when we were flush with money, Scott even came to a few of the Bat Summits, which was unusual for an inker. But he was very, very involved in what we were doing and would often have suggestions for stories or suggestions for characters and things like that. He had a lot of input, more input than the inker usually has. He was very much part of the whole process, and he would come to some of the summits. And I don't know if it was once or twice, his wife came along as well, and we always enjoyed it when his wife came, because she was every bit as charming as Scott is. And she also used to work for and maybe she still does, used to work for some of the big modeling agencies in New York, and we used to pester her with questions about supermodels, which she very graciously would answer. I think she was amused at our interest. So anyway, hey, Ashley. It's time for an Ashley twin spin. He gets a second question this go round. Ashley Kronk 73 once again. As a big Tim Drake fan, I have a lot of time for the art of Norm Brayfogle, Tom Lyle, and Tom Grummett, as they're all very influential when it comes to the third Robin's look. Do you have any stories or memories about these artists that are suitable to share? Thanks for all the great videos. Well, I don't have any stories that aren't suitable to share. As someone once told me and a couple of other comic creators I was hanging with, boy, you comic book guys are clean cut. No, we are. We're not, for the most part, troublemakers. So Tom Grummett, I loved working with him. Just awesome talent, the energy. I love the whole feel of Tom's work. It's pure comics, and he's the whole package. I mean, you can just draw anything you throw at him, and it's always appealing looking. It's always lively and fun, and I loved working with him on Robin, and he was my first artist on the monthly, so he helped me build Robin's world early on, including the Redbird. And I've told the story before about how I did an initial drawing of the Redbird just to show how it would work. And the Redbird was Robin's car, if you don't know, and it looks like a street legal beater that any teenager might drive, like a used car Dad picked up off the lot for cheap, or a hand-me-down. But then it transforms. It sort of expands, and things happen. It alters itself into the awesome crime-fighting vehicle that is the Redbird, far more aerodynamic and badass looking. And I did an initial drawing, and then, of course, DC wanted to license it for toys and things, and they wanted me to sign a participation agreement. And I said, well, there's no pencil drawing of it, only mine, which meant I would get all the money when Redbird was made into a toy. And I didn't think it was fair, because Tom was going to be the first one to draw it in the comic, which means he was going to take my miserable, sloppy, crappy sketch and turn it into something real that readers would relate to. In other words, do a great drawing based on my hints and suggestions. And so I called Tom and I said, we need a pencil drawing of the Redbird, and then we can sign the participation agreement. And he says, well, I'm fine with what you drew. And I said, no, Tom, you're not fine with what I drew, because you won't get any money. You won't share credit for creating the car. And he goes, yeah, but you created it. I said, I created the idea of it, but you're going to create the final look. And if this thing clicks and people like it, and it becomes a lot of, Corgi toys or Hot Wheels toys, that's going to be because of what you did, not what I did. What I did wasn't as special as what you were going to do to the Redbird. And so he agreed. And I had to admit later that I was right. Because they used the name Redbird in the Batman and Robin movie. It was a motorcycle, but they still called it the Redbird. But technically, we still created that. So Tom and I got some cash, and they've made it toys over the years. And that's it's nice to get a check for something you did 30 years ago. Trust me, it's money for no work. Now, Tom Lyle was another friend that he worked on. We met at a convention. I got him a job doing Skywolf backups in the back of Airboy, and he was my first Skywolf backup guy. Did that for a while, and then he moved up to DC, and then eventually I joined him at DC to do Robin, and we were kind of he was under exclusive there, and they were looking for something for him to do, and they thought, well, let's put these guys back together. And we had done more than Skywolf. Actually, we created a superhero series at Eclipse Comics called Strike that ran for a little while. And Tom also did some Skywolf miniseries. We worked quite a bit together, but he moved on to DC. He was working on, I believe, the Comet and Starman. I believe there was a series Starman with him before the other Starman. And so anyway, we worked on Robin together, and it was great. We were living together in the same town at the time. We were both living in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, so we would take the train up to DC together, and we were hanging out together quite a bit. And we would do store appearances and conventions in the area. But the first store appearance we did together after Robin came out, actually the week Robin came out, was at this really terrific toy store called the Comic Book Shop. I love the directness of that name. It was the Comic Book Shop. It was across the street from the Lancaster train station. And so we agreed with the store owner. He was a friend of ours. Hey, we'll do an appearance there. Our first appearance post Robin's publication will be there. So I picked Tom up at his house, and we drive over in my old truck, and we're driving onto the lot, and there's a line out the door of the store, the length of the strip mall. I mean, there's like a couple of hundred people there. And that had never happened to either one of us at an appearance. And I'm pulling into the parking space, and I said to Tom, I said, the thing we got to remember is none of these people know who we are. We're not some comic book superstars. They're here for Robin. And this looks like this might make our name for us. Maybe someday they'll line up just to see us. But for right now, it's just Robin. And it was my sic transit gloria speech. To basically, let's not get our egos out of whack here. And Tom agreed, and we went in, and we had a great time. But it did build both of our reputations. I think Tom and I both owed our comic book careers to Tim Drake and this miniseries. Now Norm I never knew well, and the only time we ever collaborated was on an issue of Detective during Nightfall, which I really enjoyed. I love Norm's work. I'm with you, Norm, terrific artist. And I appreciate the fact that Norm gave Tim Drake his initial look, and he gave him a physique of an adolescent, and he understood that dynamic. That Tim Drake is becomes an athletic guy and everything else, but he's not going to be muscle bound. He's not going to be as developed. He's not going to be as big a guy as an adult. And that was the problem, not with Tom Lyle and not with Tom Grummett, but sometimes we would run into this problem where they would draw, artists would draw Robin, and he just looked too old. He looked like an adult, that they just made a little shorter. And but Norm and most of the Robin artists understood, he's still a kid, he's not fully developed. And I Norm made this costume work. He made the physique work. He made everything about it work, and him and Alan Grant as well. Because people ask me questions, I created Tim Drake, and I really didn't. I built on what Marv Wolfman did first, and Alan Grant did after, and then I continued to build the character, based on the, very solid foundation provided to me. But yeah, I don't really have any stories about Norm. Norm was a very reserved guy. And like I said, I didn't get to work with him a lot. He was pretty much, it was him and Alan, joined at the hip on Detective. And boy, did they do some incredible work. I love their run on Batman. I love everything Norm and Alan did. They were keeping the fires lit, until we could, till Doug and I arrived there and we built Nightfall with Denny's guidance. Okay, Creeper Weirdo. So I watch a lot of movie reviews on YouTube. My question is, can you deconstruct a work without throwing out the classic everything you like is secretly horrible? Are there examples of examining a character or world without deconstruction? Well, you can, well, first of all, what's a deconstructed storyline for those of you who don't know what a deconstructed storyline? And I'll use the type of story that we all know very well. Every heist story is a deconstructed storyline. As you know, in every heist movie, a gang gets together to plan what it is they're going to steal. How they're going to break into the vault, how they're going to hold up the armored car, whatever it is they're going to go and grab. They make, detailed, ornate plans, and they practice and scheme and everything else. Where the deconstruction comes in is, as you know, nothing ever works out the way they planned. There's always problems, complications. One of the gang members is crazy, or one of them is a rat, or the police have been on to them from the beginning, or mechanical difficulties. Just things happen that are unforeseen. And that's what makes a great heist story, because out of those unforeseen circumstances arise all of the suspense. And then we see how the characters react against each of these new challenges. Do they fall apart? Do they keep on going on? Do they run away? Whatever. And that's where our story comes from. And that's what a deconstructed story is. It's a plan set in motion that falls apart. If you ever want to see a movie that has no deconstruction and gets it all wrong, A Few Good Men, where Tom Cruise lays out for his legal team how he's going to get Jack Nicholson to break on the stand. And then the next scene, we see him do everything he said, and Jack Nicholson breaks on the stand. Don't write that way. That's a dumb way to write, because you basically told your story twice. Now, a deconstructed storyline that doesn't bring out the worst in the characters, it actually, in the end, brings out the best in the characters, is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Now, Steve Martin is kind of an uptight businessman. He's got everything in the world. He's got his beautiful wife, his beautiful house, his beautiful kids. He's got a great job. He's making good money. He's secure, and he likes things just so. He's a bit of a control freak. He gets stranded in New York, or nearly stranded in New York, by a blizzard, and runs into John Candy, who is the polar opposite of Steve Martin. His life is not in control. He's scrabbling from every dime. He's a slob. He doesn't seem to have a lot going for him, and he's not reserved like Steve Martin. He's an outgoing, loquacious, charming kind of guy who grates on every single last one of Steve Martin's nerves. This is like the kind of guy he doesn't like normally. And of course, as their plans to get home for Thanksgiving are thwarted over and over and over again, and they literally have to find new ways to transport themselves from, ever closer home by truck, by plane, by train, by automobile, by whatever means of transportation they can possibly take, we learn more and more about them. And though often they're at each other's throats, or they're not getting along, and they have moments where they have minor victories and then major failures, in the end, we really like both of these guys for different reasons, and we see where their personalities come from, and we see the humanity at their core, and they begin to like each other. They begin to bond, and we want to see them bond because they earn that bonding as the world falls apart around them. They earn it because they struggle and strive, and we can all relate to this. Everybody's got a nightmarish travel story where everything went wrong, and so it's not that everything you know is rotten or everything you know about them is horrible. We find out their true spirits, and it's kind of a holiday, Christmassy, even though it takes place at Thanksgiving. It's kind of a Christmassy story, so of course they learn something about themselves. But it's all organic and natural, and it feels right. It doesn't feel forced or preachy in any way. And the end is a total tearjerker. Another deconstructed character who emerges at the end a better, stronger, more sympathetic character is Mad Max throughout the first three films. I'm not going to count the most recent film because I liked it, but Mad Max was kind of a bystander in his own movie. He really wasn't much of you know, a player. I mean, he was as badass as he usually is, but he didn't seem to be setting things in motion as he does in his first 3 films. Now, the first movie, it's a total deconstruction job. He's torn down to nothing. Basically becomes a savage after his family is murdered. Hope I'm not spoiling anything for you. And then Road Warrior, we join him, and he's living on his own. He's a loner. He doesn't care about anybody. He's turned his back on the past. He's just concerned about surviving day to day, and he doesn't seem to have any sympathy for any humanity around him, and he seems to be out only for what he can get. But things change, and his heart begins to soften as he sees, he basically adopts this band of people who are in desperate need of a leader, someone to take the risk for them, someone with the skills to get them out of the situation they're in. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, we find him once again on his own, but again, something happens, and he is adopted into a family of wayward children, and practically becomes a parent to them, because the hero worship him, and he doesn't want that, but he lives up to their expectations of him by saving all of them. So we see that all of the humanity has not been beaten and knifed and shot out of Max. He's still a human guy with human feelings. Now, a classic deconstructed plotline that brings out character for good or for bad, but usually for humor's sake, is an old one. And it goes back to early days of television. And I've never read about this. I've never seen anybody talk about this. I think I'm the only person who's ever thought about this. And in an episode of a series called Make Room for Daddy, or also known as The Danny Thomas Show, Danny Thomas is on the way to a gig. Danny Thomas is an entertainer. He's a nightclub entertainer. And he drives through this small podunk little town in the South called Mayberry. You might have heard of it. Now, this is before the Andy Griffith Show. This is where the Andy Griffith Show was born. So he goes through this town, he gets stopped for speeding, and he gets put in jail by Sheriff Taylor, who is a more sort of venal, nasty, tricksy version of Andy Taylor than we would later see. And Andy Taylor throws him in jail and holds him there, and basically holds him with the idea he's going to get as much revenue out of this guy as he can. And regular characters from the show, visit to try to get Danny out of jail. And in those visits, it's rife with comedy. It's rife with comedy. It's a fish out of water story. Danny's plans have been thwarted. His friends arrive to try to save him, and we see their characters, and we're familiar with his agent and everybody else. We see these characters. We've seen them before, and now we're seeing them react in a new setting, and it brings this other dimension to their characters that we never got when they were joking around at the nightclub or joking around at Danny's apartment. We're seeing them in a new light. It's also a very, very funny episode. And this episode was so popular that phone calls and letters poured into the network of people that wanted to see the show again. And remember kids, this is before VCRs. So when you missed the show, you missed it. And if you watched this show in 1959 or whatever, and you missed it, you reasonably could expect you were never going to see it again. Okay? And so people were like, hey, I want to see that again, or I told all my friends about it, and they want to see it. Okay? So the network, this is really unusual. They reran this episode 2 more times during the season and they even advertised that they were rerunning it by popular demand. And when they syndicated the show, this one was in it's like every 10 episodes was this episode when they would do the reruns and syndication. That's how popular it was. And of course, out of this show grows the Andy Griffith Show, which went on for years and years, which Danny Thomas produced. Now, the popularity and the way this episode hit was not lost on situation comedy writers and producers. And so almost every situation comedy from that point on would have an episode or 2 or 3 during the run where they would stick their characters in jail. And it just became a common situation comedy trope. And again, the same thing happens. It's fish out of water. The characters are thrown in situations we've never seen them in before, but we're familiar with the characters, and so we're very much amused by the reactions to what's going on. I think Happy Days threw Fonzie and Richie into jail at least once a season, to the point where they had recurring jail characters that they would bring the character actors back to play the same character again. But every series did this. I mean, The Odd Couple, whatever. Beverly Hillbillies. You name a series, there's at least one episode where they threw the cast in jail. And with the same results as the Danny Thomas Show. Now, this trope kind of stops being used for a long time. You would see it occasionally every now and then. But in the final episode of Seinfeld, the core Seinfeld cast finds themselves thrown in prison in a small town. Basically, they get arrested for just being the awful people that we always knew they were in all the previous seasons. And because it was the final episode, I always thought that this was the comedy writers on the show, the writers on the show. This was their sly nod to situation comedy history. Might not be true. I may be just totally full of crap and just imagining it. But I like to think they were like, let's end with them in jail. Let's show that we never had to send them to jail till the very last episode. We never had to rely on that tired situation comedy trope, and then we put them in jail at the end. And of course, if you ever watch Seinfeld, it makes perfect logical sense. This was a lot of people didn't like the way this series ended. I thought it was the perfect way to end this series, where these miserable, narcissistic New Yorkers get their comeuppance, and they end up in prison, charged with being their awful selves. And I love the show. But you got to admit, these characters were funny, but you wouldn't want to have them as a friend. They were always, disloyal and self-interested and, prissy and, and just weren't pleasant people. And I like the way the series ended. And I really want to believe that it was a nod to the trope of taking your cast and putting them behind bars. Braxton. Hey, last episode you talked a little bit about American Power from CrossGen. I never knew about this book or the story behind it. Could you please reveal more details about the saga that never was? Well, basically it was our take on, super soldiers created by science, created by the American government, to fight radical Islam. And while it was still, pro-America, and, we don't like jihadists, we didn't show them in a good or sympathetic light, is a little darker than Captain America. It's a little more espionage-y, a little more cloak and dagger, character. The government was given a lot of deniability, kind of Mission Impossible kind of thing. And also we were going to show the side effects of, these serums, these treatments that would turn these characters into enhanced metahumans or whatever you want to say, not necessarily superheroes, but we were going to show some of the physical and psychological side effects of this, which would happen, because which we know from steroid abuse and human growth hormone abuse and things like that. And but again, gung-ho, pro-America, anti-terrorism kind of story. And as I said in a previous video, the leftist contingent in the comic book medium howled like banshees at us doing this. We even had a writer quit at CrossGen over doing this title. And Mark Alessi, in a very rare example of Mark Alessi backing down. Even though this thing was going to sell like gangbusters, it was going to be by far the biggest selling title we had ever put on the market. And it's a shame. It's a shame we didn't go through with it, because it came at a time when it might have saved CrossGen if we had a book that was potentially as profitable as this one was going to be. And I could tell you the whole story of the first 2 issues, which were written, or you could read them yourself. How about that? I offered this deal before for Denny's Bat Bible, Denny O'Neill's Bat Bible, which is still up. If you want to do that deal, we can do that deal. But I'm going to do the same deal for what I call the American Power Master File, which is the first 2 scripts and the first 2 covers and some story art. A few pages were done before we got axed. So you can read the first. I think the first issue is 32 pages. I mean, so it's you can get into the universe and get into the characters. You can read it yourself. And how do you get that? Well, go to brunobookstore@gmail.com. But first, go to St. Jude's. Go to St. Jude's Hospital. Google it. DuckDuckGo it. Whatever you do, Bing it. Go to St. Jude's Hospital and make a donation. I don't care what donation you make. $5, $10, $20. It's a great cause. St. Jude's is a children's hospital for children who are desperately in need of surgery, medication, therapy, whatever. And their parents never receive a bill. They've saved countless children's lives. And coincidentally, the hospital was founded by Danny Thomas, which I didn't really think about when I was putting this video together. So it's a great cause. So if you go to St. Jude's, make the donation, and we're on the honor system here. Go to Bruno Bookstore and say, hey, Chuck, I dropped some money to save some kids' lives. Can you send me the American Power Master File? And I will. I will send it to you immediately. You will get it by return email. And you can read it and see what all the fuss was about. And I've made this offer in the past and raised thousands for a different charity. But I'm making it to you, my Ask Chuck Dixon audience. So pony up some cash for the kids, and you'll get a comic book rarity sent to you at your email location. Hey, it's a Braxton twin spin. We got 2 twin spins going this episode. And Braxton says, so would Frank Castle use a VZ61 Scorpion or not? No, he wouldn't. The Scorpion was a Soviet-made weapon. It fired 32 caliber bullets, like a pistol round, and a pretty candy-ass pistol round at that, if you're talking about a gun meant for warfare. And this was primarily designed to be used by tankers. That's why it has the stubby appearance. So you could, swing this thing around inside of a tank. It wouldn't get hooked up on any cables or turn handles or anything. And it was a sidearm for tankers to defend their tank when all else failed. And boy, it's just not much of a gun. It looks cool. I got to admit, it's a cool looking gun. I rented one of these at a range one time because I was so interested in it, and I was sorry I rented it. I was even sorrier that I bought a full box of ammunition to fire from it because the experience was not interesting. It's wildly inaccurate and just weak. I swear I got more recoil from those BB gun machine guns at the state fair than I got off of this thing. It was like not firing a gun at all. And, it was fully automatic, but it just was like, it was just not a good shooting experience. And it's not, at 32 caliber, not particularly a man stopper. And, probably tough to get magazines for. So Punisher, no, Punisher would not use a Scorpion. I don't really think Punisher would use any Russian or Soviet made weapon at all. When I wrote him, he just wasn't a fan. Probably bad memories from the Nam. As a side note, because you folks are great, you send in great questions, but sometimes there's questions you don't know to ask. So a little tangent here. Larry Hama came on board with the Punisher books for part of the Suicide Run crossover, and it was me and Stephen Grant and Larry writing the 3 titles for a few months. And the first meeting we had, Don Daly rented us a room somewhere, and Larry shows up, so we can talk Punisher. And Larry's first question to me was, what do you see as Frank's 3 calibers? And this is a question that gun people can ask each other and totally understand. I know what you mean. Most gun owners have 3 calibers that they like. You have to restrict yourself to the number of calibers that you have weapons in, because otherwise you end up with this hodgepodge of ammunition. This way, if you choose 3 basic calibers for your weapons, you can, stockpile or buy or whatever. You know what ammo you're getting, and you're always going to have ammo for all of your guns. This is important if you're a gun owner. What is the use of owning a gun if you don't have ammunition for it? And restricting yourself to 3 ensures that chances are you'll have a ready supply if you want to go to the range or go hunting or whatever, and you don't have to run out last minute. It's never a good idea to run out last minute to buy ammunition, because you cannot be assured of supply. So Larry's question was perfectly logical to me, and I said 223, just standard round for an M16 or an M4 or AR-15. And I said my reasoning is because it'd be readily available. It's literally the most common caliber, in the United States. Frank would have no problems getting, caseloads of 223, by robbing armories or whatever. If the crap hit the fan, there'd be a lot of 226 around. You'd be able to find it. My other caliber, I said, would be 12 gauge, because I'm a shotgun man, and I always picture Frank as a shotgun man. And I said, and then 45 ACP, because Frank is most often, or in that period, was most often pictured with a Colt 1911 automatic as his sidearm, his pistol of choice. And I thought, that's just a natural, that's a given. So Larry said, well, I agree with you about the 12 gauge. I agree with you about the 45 ACP, because Larry's a 1911 man. He said, but I disagree about the 223, because it's not a man-stopping round. It's a less than lethal round. More on that in a minute. If you're not a gun nut, I'm boring you, I'm sorry. but somebody asked about a gun. And then he said that instead of the 223, I would go with 308. So it's a bigger, heavier caliber, and definitely will drop a person, even from a distance. And I said, you know what, you're probably right, but I was going for availability over lethality. And he said, well, I can see that. I can see, my choice wasn't just willy-nilly out of the blue. And the 223, as I said, my choice for Frank, because of availability, was designed by the United States military as a less than lethal round. It is not meant to kill the enemy. It is meant to wound the enemy. And you're like, well, why would that be, Chuck? And well, that would be because the thinking in our military at the time was we would basically be fighting insurrectionist, counter-insurrectionist type fights, which we did in Vietnam. Well, every battle we've fought since World War II has been counter-insurrection. I should say since Korea. We're not fighting against standing armies. And the thinking is that a lethal round takes one enemy off the field. A less than lethal round takes two, 3 or more men off the field, because somebody's got to carry that wounded guy away. And that was the thinking, and that's the reason for the 223. But anyway, off on a tangent, but it's a Larry Hama story, which is always a good time. And I thought you might want to know that. And of course, none of you had any way to ask me about that, because you just didn't know. You weren't in the room with us. You weren't there. So now you were. It's like you were there. Lefty Knox. Hey, Chuck, I've heard a lot of talk about there being something of a rivalry between Dennis O'Neil and Frank Miller. I initially chalked it up as rumors, but I recently watched your 50th podcast where you discussed them, and it seems like there was some truth to it. Would you say the two had a rivalry from what you've witnessed? And could you also share any O'Neil-Miller stories if possible? I've never met Frank Miller, so I don't have any Miller stories. I got lots of Denny stories. Yeah, I guess you'd call it a rivalry. Denny and Frank had different ideas of who Batman was. And if you ever knew Denny, he was pretty hidebound about who he thought Batman was and how he thought Batman should be presented. And his understanding is that Return of the Dark Knight was outside of canon. So Frank was given some leeway with Batman. I think Denny, having come off Daredevil, editing Frank on Daredevil, thought that Frank would like he did with Daredevil, explore Batman in the same way. But Frank sort of takes Batman in a different direction, and he takes the whole franchise in a different direction. Of course, it was enormously successful, and Denny wasn't against that. But he always insisted this is not canon. The story is a departure for Batman. And and then Batman Year One is more in keeping with what Denny's vision was for the character. Now, when we get over to Batman meeting Spawn, Frank Miller's kind of off the reservation. He's working for Todd doing this crossover. He's not working for Denny. Denny's not editing it. And so Frank goes a little nuts on his interpretation of Batman. And I remember we were at a Bat Summit, and a Federal Express package came just before lunch for Denny. And as we were walking to lunch, we had to walk to a different building. Denny is opening it, and it's from Frank Miller. And it's this initial image by Todd of Spawn with the Batarang stuck in his head. And Denny just stopped on the walkway and said a lot of bad words that your mom wouldn't want you to hear. And just said that this basically was Frank's go to hell message to him. Now, I never saw the two of them together. I don't know all of the components here. If this was meant as a joke or a little ball busting, I don't know. But I know Denny didn't like it. Denny took it hard. And Denny could do that because that's what made Denny Denny. He took this stuff very seriously. He didn't take himself seriously, but he took this work very seriously. He very much understood that he was a steward for Batman and the other characters that came under his aegis. And he was very jealous in a good way, of how he watched over them. And he didn't like seeing departures like this for no reason other than to shock. But, we all understood, hey, it's, he's over in Todd McFarlane land. The whole point is to shock. The whole point is this visceral reaction, and we understand why he's doing it. Nobody on the Batman crew at the time would have ever done anything like this, because I think we all, 99% shared Denny's vision of Batman and didn't really want to, pee in the pool. Had no desire to do that. Hey, I love doing these videos. I love sharing my opinion. It's pretty obvious I love sharing my opinion. Going on my little rants and my little tangents and everything else. But I need your help to keep doing these. Now, if you're watching these, and I hear from lots and lots of people, they enjoy these. They look forward to them every week. And that makes me happy. But I need more of you. And I know there are more of you, because I hear from people all the time, people I know well, and they'll say, I didn't know you had a YouTube channel. It's like, I'm on Facebook all the time. You're on Facebook all the time. I talk to you all the time. We have all these mutual friends. Actual real mutual friends who communicate. And here, almost 2 years later, you're just hearing I'm on YouTube. It's frustrating. And the reason for it is you've got gatekeepers. We all know social media is a lie. We all know how hard it is to get anything out on social media that everybody doesn't see it. Everything's going through a straw instead of a fire hose. And so I need your help to spread the word. If you enjoy this channel, share it with a friend. Tell a friend, post about it on social media. Increase my reach. So I can keep doing these, because I want to keep doing these, but I can't keep doing these the way things are going. Particularly this disturbing trend on YouTube. YouTube, apparently, they've not only moved the goalposts, they've taken the goalposts and left the stadium. Because even though I have more subscribers and I have more viewers, somehow the money is going backwards. And I don't make much money off of these, trust me. I'm nowhere near any kind of decent earnings on these. I'm basically doing it because I like the outreach. I like talking to you, and I enjoy the feedback, here. But it'd be nice if this paid. And I see the money going backwards. So obviously they've changed something. So they're just making that hill steeper. So the only way around that is you, me, and all your friends getting to know about this channel, at least checking it out every once in a while and subscribing and liking and all the rest of it, and kind of help me. Otherwise, I'm going to have to go to a pay system. I'm on unauthorized TV, but I may have to go there entirely if I can't make this work. So if you could help me out there, make 2022 the year where I reach 10,000 subscribers and make this thing, work for all of us. And that's it. That's it for me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing. And thanks in advance if you help me spread the word and make this channel a bigger force for comic book knowledge. Okay. All right. That's it for me. I'll see you all down the road.